Welcome to Journey of an Aesthete with one of my favorite return guests, Alexandra Carter. Alex Carter. Welcome.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you. And we're in your studio, I guess, in my studio. And how's Shelby doing? All right?
Shelby.
Shelby.
Oh, she's good. She's good. She's at daycare right now. So.
Okay. So she's not going to be making an appearance like last time. Okay.
No appearances.
So the occasion of this particular episode is a discussion of a very unusual movie, film, picture by Luca
Guadagnino.
Luca Guadagnino, a major force in young Italian filmmaking.
Mm-hmm.
I had seen I Am Love actually in theaters before, and so I knew some of his work. But this is something I'm getting outside of my comfort zone today, because I usually have a policy to never watch any reboots or remakes of anything. And yeah, and so there's that. But I'm going to get into, hold that thought. There's a lot of reasons. There's also a lot of reasons why I broke that for this.
This is not. I think we should never consider this a reboot or a remake. It's like it's inspired by the original, but it's totally different.
It is, but it in some ways, yeah, you're right. It is totally different. We'll get into it now, but it's a movie, Suspiria, originally by Dario Argento. And as you know, I saw it as a boy in 1977 on the big screen with my dad. You know, with the man with the dog, the blind man with the dog, and the black and red, and the coven and the dance. And so that film is among my favorite Argento films. So there's that one. There's Deep Red, which is about a pianist after all, and then there's The Bird with the Crystal Plumage, and then there's some interesting films he did in the 80s, and then Terror at the Opera. So he's a major. He even had a book on Dario Argento by a really good writer called Broken Mirrors, I think was the title, or something like that, if I remember correctly. So I came into this liking the original film a lot and having seen it many times. And so it's a different, but as you point out, maybe it's an entirely different thing. I mean, you know, the first thing that did you want to talk some about how you first saw this, or did you see it in theaters or at home, or how did you first?
Sure. No, I saw it at home. And you know what made me think of it when you brought up us talking about another movie was that I had just watched his newer movie, Luca Guadagnino's newer movie, which is Bones and All, which is another kind of body horror film. And it made me like nostalgic for watching Suspiria again, because there are elements of that are very like, they're so visceral, but they're also so tender and about love. And I wanted to rewatch Suspiria after watching that movie. So, I mean, Suspiria is a whole nother animal, like, than any of his films, in my opinion. It still has that sense of tenderness, but that's not really what I love about it. I think what I love about it is the dance. And that's something that...
Were you a ballerina or a dancer?
No, I never... I mean, yeah, I dabbled in dance as a kid, as a lot of girls do, but I never was like serious. And but as a painter of the female figure, I look at dance a lot, and I've looked at dance like for a lot of my inspiration, and like still images of people in motion have been a big reference point for me. So that's like the biggest thing that I love about this movie. But there's a whole bunch of other things. And I think, you know, when I first saw it, as soon as the first scene started, like I knew right away, I don't even need to think about the original movie, because it is so different. Like the mood and the visual, the aesthetic mood is so different. I mean, you know, the original is so known for being this Technicolor, crazy colors, sparkling everywhere.
Well, that thought, how I would put it is that the original is about as un-70s a 70s movie as anybody could have made in the 70s. And the newer one is so deeply 70s, and it was just shot a few years ago. We'll get into that. I mean, the aesthetics of the brown, everything's brown, and the clothes, it just really, you know, as you'll admit, he really gets into the era, because I think he's working out some issues about politics. But we'll hold on, we'll get ahead of ourselves. But yeah, go back. I'm sorry, I just wanted to.
Exactly, yeah. And I think, so I saw it as soon as it was released on Amazon.
Right.
And, you know, I was really drawn by the promo images too, just knowing that there was going to be a bigger presence of dance in the film. And this is like 2018 was when I was like really into dance. Like I was researching Butoh a lot, which is like a Japanese expressionist dance that came like post-war. I was researching Mary Wigman, who definitely is quoted kind of in this film. I was researching Pina Bausch. So all these kind of like post-war expressionist dance movements have been really influential for me, and especially at that time in my work. You know, this is kind of before I was making work about motherhood, fertility. I was back then I was making work about like the body kind of exploding out of itself. And so I was, really drawn to it for that reason. And so I watched it in 2018. And then I remember I rewatched it in 2019. And that is when I had started on this like fertility journey and trying to be a mother. And so I saw it through another lens too, because like there's this other element of like mothering, or like, you know, it's a coven, and there are all these mother figures going on. So I thought that was really interesting too.
Yeah, I mean, it's well, the first thing that comes to my mind in talking about this film, is I said the locale of Germany in the late 70s, and the utter fidelity, design-wise, to certain parts of the 1970s, more in Western Europe than here. You know, everything is in brown. I mean, amazing to take. So the only time color comes in is in a very violent, ritualistic moment towards the end, where you see pink blood on people, but that's it. Until then, it's brown, chocolate brown, khaki, beige, the people, the skin, which was a big thing in that part of the world, in that era. And so the other thing that's brought to my attention is the politics. And I think one of the things the film might be about, in a way that probably isn't talked about much because they tend to focus more on some of the things you mentioned, is the history of past 100 years of politics in the world. And Luca Guadagnino has a youth as an active Communist Party member in Italy, Italian Communist Party, wrote for Italian communist newspapers. And the first thing you were encountered with is the Baader-Meinhof group. Baader-Meinhof posters, discussions on television of Baader-Meinhof, which is part of the Red Army faction, which is a history that I've studied very deeply. So it's interesting. So in a way, I felt for a moment like I was watching a German film, by Margaret von Trotta, because she made many films on this issue. Many Germans did, about that terrorism and that thing. But you get a sense that the people in this dance troupe are kind of sympathetic to this far extreme leftism, this sort of as many people were, unfortunately, in that era. And there's a whole thing about East Germany and West Germany. And so then the third thing that comes to me is the dance and the kind of nature of this particular kind of dance studio and the kind of work they're doing, which is very severe. It's very austere. And it's a kind of a dance that when I was younger, I experienced a lot. I think because it was done a lot. Like there's parts of my life where I was really into Paul Taylor, for example, which is very different, much more quote unquote traditional. And then there's a thing of like Mercy Cunningham, which is closer to it's a different thing about the body. And so it's weird to watch a film where these things are being brought to me that I often don't even see in films, mainstream or otherwise. So that in itself, like those two things, the politics and the wrestling with political extremism, and like I think he's exercising something about his past or Europe or something, I think. And I know, but I don't understand how it works, is connected to the things you're talking about covens and maternal figures. I don't know really what that is. And so it's a very, very insidious film. And that's a compliment. It sneaks up, what I mean is it sneaks up on the viewer, suspenseful. That first violent moment of that body, what happens to that body, almost like it's being, that's effects or no effects. Like, I mean, I'm less interested in how it was done, although a lot of work went into that.
Yeah.
It's really shocking. It's almost like it's like the first slashing in a slasher film, and it's happening in public in this studio, and there's things happening to this body, and that's a very, very hard scene to watch.
Yeah, for sure.
And so is it interesting, like the original Suspiria? Well, it's interesting. I just want to use a viewer, when you saw that, did you know that that's what was going to happen? It was going to introduce this kind of, and what was happening to this poor, I guess you could use the phrase poor girl if you wanted to, or this person, right, being eaten from the inside, or what the heck is happening?
Yeah, no, I had no idea. But also, I think that, and that happens somewhat early in the movie, and it really conjures this idea of witchcraft being associated with dance and dance. Oh. I mean, you think about dance and the origin of dance, and it was used, you think it was used in ritual. It's used, and so the power of dance to kind of kill this woman, because the whole time Dakota Johnson is performing her dance in the next room, and it's moves of her dance that are inflicting these wounds on this woman. Absolutely. And it's fascinating to watch. It's so jarring. I mean, yeah, it was interesting because my husband watched it with me, and he hadn't seen it since that first time in 2018. And right after that scene, he said, "Whoa, I don't remember that scene being so intense." And I think it's just because like it had been so long, but that was his, like, he had a really, gut reaction to that, as most people would.
Well, that's like the first knifing in a slap. It's like, it's I mean, in a way, it does remind me a lot of it does remind me of some of the earlier David Cronenberg pictures, like because of the body thing, like Videodrome, when the James Woods is watching the Dirty Movie with Debbie Harry, and then there's a wound that develops in his stomach.
Yeah, I haven't seen that one, but I've seen The Brood, and then I also just saw
The Brood, definitely.
Crimes of Human Nature, and both of those have that. He has a thing about growths from the body, right? Yeah. And there's definitely like Cronenberg stuff going on in the.
Well, The Brood. I mean, I wanted to do a Brood episode with you someday. I don't know if that you're open to that or not. How you feel about that movie? Sure. Yeah, that's a great film. But this is kind of Guadagnino has his own thing. And I come back to these words, austere and ascetic. Now, that could just be this film. In fact, it is, because I Am Love is very different. I mean, it's they're both very visual, but it's a different subject matter. And
he's very paced, though. Like it's almost like he wants, when he uses big visuals, he wants them to pop so much, and that's why it's so muted. And then all of a sudden, there's blood, and it's so intense. Or all of a sudden, they have red costumes. That's the other part that is like the kind of punctuation mark in all of this this muted palette that he has. It makes the red so much more powerful because color is all relative. I know this as a painter. If you put tons of fluorescent colors together, they're gonna just kind of
wash out
their own new language, right? They're not gonna pop on their own. Right. But if you put a fluorescent color amongst muted colors, it's gonna really make a statement. And I think that's what his muted palette did for him. And I think that having just watched Bones and All, the other film that he did, I think it's like that movie is a little bit similar too in that sense. It's not nearly as muted or toned down, but it's like it's the moments of cannibalism in that movie are so powerful because there isn't really like any sign of that otherwise, you know?
Yeah. Have you seen the movie Trouble Every Day?
No, but it was, I remember I was reading a review of
movies.
Bones and All, and they compared it to Trouble Every Day, saying Trouble Every Day was so much better. So now I have to see Trouble Every Day.
Yeah, I like Trouble Every Day a lot. Well, it's a different, yeah. So yeah, you're right about color. Well, you're a painter, so you're seeing this. You're seeing things I might not see, but you can maybe help me see them better. It's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
See, I identify that palette as the era. I mean, I understand that, you can shoot an artist can do anything they want with anything because it's not real life. And ostensibly, you don't have any obligation to quote unquote real life. There's always an element of stylization, even in the most anti-stylized naturalistic work of art. If I put a camera on you now and that top with the paint on it, I can do it in black and white. You don't even see the paint. You're just sitting there, no makeup or whatever, right? Or I can photograph you in some kind of costume with sort of lights behind you. So what I'm saying is that there's all kinds of ways to do things. But the uncanny thing about this film is how right he gets that milieu. I mean, that just a kind of brown. Like when I went to Eastern Europe. So when I went to Eastern Europe in the early 90s after the fall of the wall, 92, 93, I recorded a piano concerto in Prague, Czech Republic. I went to Poland, the industrial part of Poland in 92. Everything looked like this film. Everything, same table, same rotary phone, almost as if we were still in the late 70s. There's nothing moved, and it was just really. So I think that he's trying to get something accurate or something, maybe from his youth or something of the era. So that's interesting.
I think he's kind of like it definitely makes sense that you also see it as like a period piece, like like really like being faithful to the time.
Oh yeah.
Whereas I see it as being like a very strategic palette, but also I think he's using the time and those current events of that era to also reflect what's going on right now. I mean, it's not that different, all this like extremely polarized far left, far right shit going on. It's not that different than what's been going on. So
yeah, I'm undecided on that question because I don't know. I mean, it depends on how one sees history or how one, does history repeat like in a cyclical fashion? Do things come back? Or in history, do you get ruptures and discontinuities where you're in an era that's unlike any other and it's nothing like anything else? I tend to lean more towards the latter. So I'm not sure it's like the 70s really, because it's all these changes, internet. But I could see that you could, you could see, but it's, it's, we're not given a lot of information though about this coven, and we're experiencing it doing really bad things to people. And so it's interesting, but yet it has a kind of a degree of loyalty, or has a kind of degree of, I put this in quotes because I don't know if it's empowerment for the people that are into it or for the peep dancers. I put that in quotes because I'm not, that's a, if you're empowered and you destroy a body like they destroyed that girl, then that's a meaningless empowerment, right? So.
Right.
Yeah, and so that's the thing. It's like, and yet, but do you think the director is drawing some parallel between political fanaticism that was mainstreamed, again, that was everybody's for the RAF? I mean, the equivalent in the U.S., everybody being for the RAF would be like if here everybody loved the Weathermen. Most people hated the Weather Underground. Most of the left and the liberals hate, even Marxists. Why is Bernardine Dohrn bombing this building? That's awful. I don't want, but I'm watching this film, Suspiria. Everybody's yay, RAF. Everybody's celebrate Biden Meinhof, get them, release them from jail. It's like sympathy for the worst. It's interesting, right? It's kind of like, is there a story being told about good intentions and those being twisted? And is that one of the things you might have insight on this? Because I don't know. It's
I don't know. This is a pretty contested part of the film, I think, because it's gotten a lot of flack for having that historical component. Some people think it's really unnecessary. And in some ways it maybe is, but it just is a totally different film with or without it, you know? So
Are these people who want to be more of a horror film and not have any of that stuff in it?
yeah, exactly.
There's so much of it in it. It's such a big part of the film, you know.
Yeah, and I think what it does is it there's something about the coven that echoes what's going on in the politics, you know, in terms of maybe, or maybe it's like some kind of warning about like if you let the old kind of rulers prevail, like then we are in for trouble.
Yeah.
And that's why Susie in the end is the top dog. You know, she is Mother Suspiriorum.
That's right. That's right.
But I think also the other thing that's very that I don't really like as much about the film is that the Dr. Kemper has such a large role. I don't think he brings that much, but I think he's part of like the political commentary, because he's coming from, he's the reminder of like what that area went through during the war, and he's the reminder of having been through all of that, so war and survival, and then Cold War, and you know everything that was going on. So I think
they're a big part of the film, and they're an opportunity for Tilda Swinton to show off her acting chops. Which
I mean, I don't know if that was necessary either. Like, it's kind of distracting because there is something off about him. And the first time I watched it, I did not know that she played him. It was in the very end of the movie. I like Googled it or something. I was like Googling about the movie, and I saw that she played him, and I was like, oh, that makes sense, because there was just something off about him. And you know, the offness I think I was picking up on is that he's heavily prosthetic, you know, he's made out of prostheses basically. And has a weird voice, and so I think, I don't know,
isn't that character really important in the film though, because that's not just because of World War II, but because aren't they kind of a researcher of things? So they would know, they would see connections of things of the past, or although of course they're resistant, right? Initially they're unsympathetic, right? They're more practical. All these things don't exist, or this isn't right, isn't going on. And so maybe that's,
he says in the beginning, he thinks the girl is just really paranoid, hysterical. And then eventually he realizes something really is going on. And then he becomes the victim of the coven for a little bit. And, you know, I think, he's definitely a very pivotal character. I could have seen less of him personally.
Well, they were in the movie too much, I think.
We
agree on that, right? Too much of them. It's like too many.
I mean, it's a long movie, so we can't help but want to edit. If we edited it ourselves, what would we have edited out? You know what I mean? So and I think this is something that Guadagnino does and gets flack for, is that his films are he's not self-conscious enough about the way he's editing the films, and he lets them go for a really long time. So personally, I end up really liking that if I like the film, you know. So
I mean, everything's all relative, Alex. If you're somebody who's into Bella Tarr, which I am, because I saw Satan Tango, which is 12 hours or 13 hours. I saw it twice in theaters. One of those times at Harvard Film Archive, I think in 2004. I saved the ticket. So that's my, if that's your measure, a 2.5 hour movie. Although to some people, if you're used to 80 minutes film, the 2.5 hour movie might be too long, but I guess that's a long way of saying, I think Luca Guadagnino is an art director. I think he's actually really serious. And I think this film is a really serious picture, if I can put it that way. In other words, I think he's into longer films, and I think he's been influenced by them. I know I haven't read enough material on what he's into, but don't you think? I think he's kind of into art, into things like so.
Definitely. Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, he's not in it for the masses, that's for sure. And I think, he's looking to create a really deep exploration of something in all of his movies that I've seen. So, but I think this one in particular, because it's horror, I think gets a lot more criticism from like people of the genre, you know? So, it's a funny animal, I think.
Yeah, I don't know what people into the genre. I mean, I don't really know if they're really into the genre. They probably don't like other things. So I don't know what they think of.
Well, yeah, those, like I pointed out, those are the people that probably thought the historical component was too much, that Dr. Kemper was too much. You know,
what do you think about my theory that he's trying to exercise his political youth and his flirtation with a certain kind of, you know, politics, or maybe, you know, what happened, you know, there's some kind of thing going on. And I mean,
sure. And it makes so much sense to me that he's Italian, and like, because all the time that I've spent with Italians, they love talking politics, you know, that is something they do not shy away from. And like, it's something they like need to talk about. And it's like, so
it's like water. It's like water, right?
Yeah. And I like that aspect of the connections that this film has to both Germany and Italy, culturally. And I think actually it was all, from what I know, I think a lot of it was filmed in Italy, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, I don't know.
But I mean, yeah, we could talk about behind the scenes stuff too, because there are, I don't know if you've seen these, but there are a few little videos on YouTube called featurettes that Amazon, I think, put out about kind of how so there's like one about the special effects. So like the makeup and stuff. And then which is interesting, but I'm not that interested in that. What I was really interested in, there's one just about dance.
Wow.
And interview the choreographer, and that's fantastic. And then there's one just like kind of about the overarching behind the scenes and Luca's kind of comments about it. And, you know, it's fascinating, just so fascinating to see that, because this film was such a like orchestrated event, you know? There's so many intentional decisions made visually and casting wise and all that. So I think it's really interesting to hear about the creation of something like that, especially as fellow creators, you know, it's so fascinating. But one thing I wanted to know from you is that as a musician, I wanted to know what you thought about the music from Thom Yorke.
I was not a big fan of the score. I'm not a big fan of it. That's a whole separate question of Radiohead, which is different, right?
Right. I mean, for me, I loved it.
Yeah, I did not love it.
But I don't know, like the major climax with that really soft music. I don't know if that.
I didn't hate that, but I didn't love that, but I like that. It's complicated. Look, you know, Johnny Greenwood does all the music for P.T. Anderson's movies, right? Doesn't he ever? So I mean, and I like very much his scores, very much, very different kind of scoring, but they could be compared. But you know, I'm very picky about film music. I should say I don't like most film music.
I'm just looking up Johnny Greenwood. Okay, so wait, he was in because I don't know he's in the alternative band. Oh, he was in Radiohead too. Okay, and
that's why that's why I'm comparing them. I mean, you know, it's funny how they're both in the same band, but you know, they could be into different things. I mean, I think Johnny Greenwood is much more into jazz and things like that, and music that I like. And I think Thom Yorke is more into hard rock and avant-garde music. And I'm not saying they both know all of it. They're very, very, that's what you're into, what your preferences are. And,
right.
You know, too much synth and electric guitar for me could, you know, I don't know. That's a thing, you know, for me. So I don't know. I didn't really, but is it, if we're going to ask the question, does the score serve the movie? Like, is it the right score for the film? Maybe. I don't know. I mean, that's a slightly different question.
Well, I think it goes. Yeah, I think personally, as like a non-musician and just like hearing it objectively, I think it goes along with that idea of the palette. You know, the palette that we're talking about. Sure. There's a kind of austerity, right?
To there is. Sounds. There is.
So I liked that about it. I really liked the music that they used for the actual dance sequence.
Okay.
I mean, that sounded more like typical horror music too, in a way. That it had that kind of like
yeah.
You know, so it kind of fit.
Yeah. Yeah, kind of. Yeah, I don't know. It's kind of like, I still think there's some mystery in this film that I kind of want you to solve. I want you to not solve, but I want you kind of inform me. There's something. So what is it? I think there's something you bring to the film that I want to talk more about. That like this this thing about joining a group that's trying to recapture prehistory. It's pre-Christian, right? If you want to call it that, or some people use the word pagan. Some people are against that word.
Right. Well, that was also a time where society was, where maybe matriarchal societies exist too. And that's exactly what this is a matriarchal society within a very secluded bubble, within a protected coven bubble.
I mean, that's another reason why you have to have Tilda Swinton play that professor, that psychologist.
Oh, yeah.
To conform to the gender rule of the film, right? In terms of how the cast, right? The sex rate, gender ratio. I don't know the cast, right? You got to have it's right. I think right there's only one cop who's a male or something like that.
Right. There's just the two cops who are male. That's the only, and they're in there for like 2 minutes.
2 minutes. So that's not part of the design of the film too.
Yeah, I think that it's basically an all-female cast, which is great. But I think you're right. There are so many mysteries about the film, and it's something I found myself. My husband is someone I'm not afraid to ask stupid questions. So as soon as we finished the film, and even a few days later, I was like, okay, wait, so what did you think about this? What did you think about this? Because I really want to know what
you guys have a really great marriage. I mean, that's kind of amazing to me. But anyhow,
yeah, I mean, like we definitely have a really good intellectual bond, and also he has similar tastes in movies. Thank goodness.
Oh, that's good. Yeah.
I was like, one of my biggest questions was, how does Susie come into being Mother Suspiriorum? Does she know her whole life that she's Mother Suspiriorum? Does she know, or does she come into it?
Are you saying is it like an ancestral plan of succession or something? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, I'm wondering, because then there's so much mention visually of her mother, right? Her Mennonite mother. And this is another really interesting aspect we haven't mentioned, is there's a lot of kind of like these throwback takes to her upbringing.
You mean in the Midwest, Ohio?
Yeah, her Ohio Mennonite upbringing, and her being kind of this outcast in that world.
You mean outcast to the Mennonite, or outcast being Mennonite in a largely?
I think both, for sure.
Because Ohio would be largely evangelical Christian, if not Catholic. One of those two, in terms of the state, right?
Right.
Some kind of ethnic Catholic immigrant, or what I call born again Christian evangelical, which took over Ohio and Michigan, right? And Mennonite's very different. It's a whole other kind of Christianity, right? A whole other thing. I'm just wondering, is that so? You're talking about the mechanics of how the politics works in terms of that group. But it occurs to me now that Mennonite, the three mothers, is that what it is? What's the name of the sister?
Yeah, there's like Mother Suspiriorum, which is like the mother of sighs, and there's Mother of Darkness and the mother of I forget what the other one is, and it's all like kind of Latin or something. It's
okay. So we got those two, and then we have revolutionary Marxist. I'm going to call it revolutionary Marxist Leninist Stalinism, which is one kind of socialism and one kind of left, which could be Maoist, or it could be the RAF or Baader-Meinhof. So what do all these things have in common? Well, they're all against something. So well, not against it, but they're all kind of like, even though they're very different. Now it's funny because the revolutionary communists tend to be very materialistic. That is anti-metaphysical, and so they would have put in jail anybody practicing anything spiritual, like Wicca or anything, as being not right, as being illegitimate, right? So just like so it's kind of interesting. So they're ultra materialistic, not metaphysical, not into, all science, right? That kind of Marxism. But then the Mennonite, but what they all have in common is that they're all right. They all want to be off the grid in a way. They kind of all want to be away from a perceived enemy that's the establishment.
Right. And they've all gone to some kind of extreme to be on the outside of something.
So is that what this film is kind of about in a way, or that? I mean, I'm not sure, or no.
I don't know. I mean, that's definitely not the parts that I latch onto. I mean, I think for me, if we were going to go more insular, like I think for me, there's something more about being a woman in society. Yeah. There's that. And then there's being in a woman's body. Yeah. And I think there's something really interesting that Guadagnino does, or the choreographer does, with the dance and all the presentation of the female body in this movie is we don't really think of sex at all, the whole film.
Well, that's on purpose.
Usually when there's this many women, it's so sexualized.
Right.
And
this is the opposite.
Fascinating.
But I would suggest that being a woman is so would it be even if half the globe is female, maybe being female is to in a way be anti-established, right? So maybe that's it. So they're all, so that's a fourth. So I would add that to the four different Mennonites. But is the film saying watch out with that? Maybe the establishment's good. By which I mean that maybe this thing that you think of as your enemy, maybe the alternative might not be the purity of your group, your alternative, but your alternative group being a cult or harming people, or in other words, that it goes off the rails, right? Is that kind of, so maybe, I don't know how that connects to embodied femaleness at all, if at all, I don't know. I mean, as you know, being a woman is just part of the world. So in that sense, it's the most establishment thing in the world because it's shared and it's universal. What I mean is that's not.
We've developed a language and a society around patriarchy. So it's still like the womanly and the maternal, all of that stuff is still like anti-establishment in a way.
Right.
It's always going to, or it's presently seen as other,
other and seen as marginalized, and it's marginalized and misrepresented. So have you read Eric Newman's The Great Mother, the book that's in the film?
That's in the film. When is that in the film?
This is important. It's one of the last shots of the film. I think it's at the train station or at the
okay. I have to look at that. Yeah, so I just picked it up.
Wow.
Maybe a couple months ago.
What are the odds of that we're talking about it? It's in the film and you just picked it up.
Yeah.
Have you started it?
Yeah, well, I haven't, and I actually have images from it on my wall. Like, look, can you see this? These are printouts from that book.
Wow.
And so I think like I was in this class about Medusa and mythology, and it was one of the other students in that class that told me, she was like, I think you'd really like this book. Wow. So I got it from the library, and I haven't read probably a single word of it, but I've just pulled through the images.
I mean, I guess the book I recommended on our last episode was Marilyn Stone's book, right? When God Was a Woman. Right. I think
and that's still in my wish list on Amazon. Okay, I should I'll just get it out of the library. Thank you for reminding me.
That's the book I'm most familiar with because it's the book I grew up with, even though it's I think that's 80s. I think that's 80s, if not 70s. Right. I think it's right. Yeah, Marilyn Stone. Yeah. And according to this, Rolling Stone passed in 2015. So one of the major, and that's something.
Yeah.
Well, I highly recommend when God.
Okay.
The woman. I mean, again, that's God. It brings back so many memories. I haven't looked at a lot of this stuff in 20 years. Well, that case because the book is that old. But I'm curious. You to tell me what you think of this Newman's book about
Yeah, well, I really should actually read it rather than just look at the pictures. But
the pictures are important. You're a painter.
Yeah, I mean,
so that's probably the most important thing, right?
Yeah, I do. I wish it was on audiobook though, because that's the only way that I read books lately as a busy mom.
You want to hear a terrible thing about me?
What?
I can't do audiobook. I can't comprehend.
I like at first I couldn't either, but I think I've learned how to comprehend some of it. It's definitely I don't get the comprehension I would get if I sat down and read it. But honestly, I'm such a slow reader. Like I think I read slower than an audiobook would read it. So it's just like pros and cons, like I don't get as much out of the book, but I at least get to read it.
What do you think about the fact we're doing this episode? I'm somebody that's a speed reader. Like I've read novels in a night, and you're a slow reader.
Yeah.
You see visuals, you see paint, and I'm not. So I guess more, is it words? And so what do you think about that diversity of human life and humanity that people, that's really something to think about, isn't it? I mean, I'm looking at your studio and I'm looking at those that's right.
I mean,
you wouldn't want to change yourself and be a different person, right? You want to honor the person you are. So I hope you're not saying, no, I wish I read at this pace or I did this.
Oh, I've always wished I read at a faster pace. I think the thing is I've been just like voracious. Like I want to consume so much, I've always wanted to watch all the films and read all the books and learn as much as I possibly can. And so, yes, I do really wish that I read faster, but yes, you're right. There's probably some kind of like give and take there. It's like, because I'm not fast verbally, that is what gives me strength visually. Maybe, who knows?
But you're having emotions watching this dance and this dances in this film.
Yeah.
And you're actually reaching conclusions about it. And so when you're watching it, so talk more about that in terms of either the dance part or the coven part or.
Yeah, I mean, I think the dance part I could talk forever about. The coven part is still like part of what you were talking about being kind of like the more mysterious part of the film, because there's not that much that's like extremely like stated about.
Oh, it's not in the text at all.
Right. It's like, how does this work? They
don't even know what it is. You barely know it's a witch's coven. Like you could almost not know if you weren't paying attention to this film. And you saw that girl being destroyed from the inside out in pus and bodily fluid. You would know that what caused that. You would have you might not have no idea like what's going on, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's only at the end when you have an actual ritual with the it's actually pink, right? It's not red. It's pink blood, right? With the hoods.
I think it's red, but it's like fluorescent. It's kind of like way overdone. I'm not sure if I liked that. But as for the dancing kind of at the end, in that end ritual, it becomes something other, right? It becomes like a ritual and not even like a dance anymore. The way those women are like moving and flapping their bodies. It's
do you want to talk about the epilepsy or the
I don't really know what that means. So like there are several times in the film where people have seizures.
They have seizures,
And I think it's just an indication of the witches having taken power over them.
Right. It's like
having done something to them.
Yeah.
And it's just like a reminder of who's in control, kind of.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure. And it's definitely related to the dance movements themselves, right? Because the dance movements are almost like this, like there's a lot of contortion and a lot of like, this weird floor movement. And even Dakota Johnson's character talks about how her dance needs to be based on the floor. Like there needs to be more floor work. And that's actually something really indicative of Butoh as well, the Japanese dance form that I mentioned. and a lot of expressionist dance forms, I think, is like this kind of, here we go with like anti-establishment again. It's like anti-ballet. So
it's so anti-ballet, sure.
Yeah, because ballet is so vertical. It's about lifting up. It's about getting higher. It's about
going down you're going down into the depths in this kind of dance. It's down. It's You're right.
Yeah, which is what makes it.
This as opposed to this kind of thing. And also, I'm a big Bob Fosse fan. As you know, I consider that the ultimate of dance in the contemporary. And that's purposely sexualized and gendered purposefully. It's actually very erotic. It was set up by Bob Fosse to be that way. So in that sense, it's a complete opposite of this film. But in one other sense, there is contortion in Bob Fosse in it. There's things that Bob Fosse dancers do with the arms and the feet that are virtually identical to what I saw in this. So there's this interesting. And also one is commercial and one isn't. You know, Bob Fosse, I'm calling it commercial. It's popular. It's, you know, musical.
Right, more popular.
The dance in this film is like Pina Bausch. It's it's a different.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, I think I've talked to you before about how I've been interested in burlesque also.
Oh yeah.
I mean, if you want to talk about Fosse. Yeah. It's very sexualized and but like in a like self-conscious way, like in a way that especially neo burlesque, like is trying to make it a statement.
Are you a fan? Have you seen the show Somebody Somewhere?
No.
Do you know about it?
No.
Murray Hill's in it. Do you know who Murray Hill is?
Yeah.
Murray Hill. No. Everybody out there, watch Somebody Somewhere.
Okay.
Murray Hill gives one of the best acting performances. He plays, or Murray plays a grain professor in a Midwestern college, like agricultural, like farming professor. And they give the most amazing performance. Like you would never know they were an FMC or never know they were introducing Dita Von Teese.
Right.
But it's still Murray Hill, and they're kind of like a person in the Midwest, and they're beautiful series. Beautiful series.
Oh, cool. I'll check it out.
Yeah, I mean, why do I think of that? Because of Murray Hill and but yeah, it's interesting, right? Like Dirty Martini and that world.
I love Dirty Martini.
Yeah.
And there's one, Julie Atlas Muse, who's like, she's super on the kind of conceptual art end of burlesque. And she even has an act that is Pina Bausch. And I want to re-watch it. I want to look it up on YouTube or something at some point. Because of just watching Suspiria, I want to kind of rewatch her exaggerated version.
It was really a revelation watching Murray Hill, because when you think of somebody that does something, like I know intellectually, of course, that people can do many things, and I know intellectually that being a stand-up comedian could translate into great acting, right, or being an announcer, but it's one thing to know that in the head. It's the one thing to see it. Like, it's one thing to see Murray Hill not being, running a show or doing jokes in between acts, and to see them playing a character. That's interesting. So you often wonder what people have in them that they can do, that they don't get a chance to do, or they don't get a chance to shine. Kind of like a lot of people dance, but you don't know it. They don't dance in public, right?
Right. Well, yeah, it reminds me. I mean, I think the transition of comedian to actor is like, exemplary of that, just like you're saying. Have you watched Beef? It's a show. I think it's on Netflix.
Not
well,
yet.
Ali Wong does a really good job of kind of bringing this like multifaceted character to life, and there's definitely like an art component to that show too, which is really interesting. So I recommend it.
I'm gonna watch Beef. Is it about the beef industry or no? About people that complain or have a kind of complaint?
Yeah, it's like people that. Well, it's like beef, as in like I have beef with someone. Like you have an issue. Yeah. So but I mean, to get back to like the coven, I guess.
Yeah.
I think that's still like an area I'm almost intimidated by, like witch culture, because it's becoming so much more mainstream now. Like there's a lot of witches out in the world now.
That's right.
And I feel like I don't know that much about it, and even though I'm so interested in it, but I'll never be like a practitioner of witchcraft, per se. But I'm like so into all of the like imagery and ritual and ideas that surround it. And I think that what we see in this movie is a pretty intense.
Does that community hate on this movie? I mean,
Yeah, I wonder. That's a really good question. I haven't really heard.
Well, I remember. So I really liked the original Suspiria and saw it many times on VHS video before your time in videotape. And I remember the Wiccan community considers it a form of hateful art.
Oh, really?
Well, of course, because you're portraying witches doing bad, and of course, they want to, they want it to be Wiccan and want it to be a consciously feminist metaphysical project, and not this negative thing. And of course, they're reacting against a history of anti-witch, hatefulness towards witches, hate crimes towards midwives, and actual hate crimes towards midwifery, right? And locking light. So it's all, so they're not able to put those emotions aside and enjoy a horror movie. I mean, right? So that, I mean, they are missing out, because Suspiria is a great movie. They even brought back, what's her name? Jessica, not Jessica Walter, Jessica Harper. See her this, but that I would imagine they'd have the same objections to this film, but I have no idea.
Yeah, I think you're probably right for sure. But I think also there's elements that could be appreciated as well. I mean, those elements being like the dancing, the kind of visuals, the devotion kind of that's expressed between women, friendship. Like there is a major component of bonding and friendship between Susie and Sarah, and then Susie and Madame Blanc.
Yeah.
So I think
I want to talk about one of those scenes where they're very intimate and they're practicing. The moment I'm talking about, where Tilda Swinton says to her, you have this, but you don't have that. What do you think? Is that scene amazing? Do you know what I'm talking about? Where that's a turning point in the film, right? In terms of her. Yeah. In terms of her character. Is that one of the things you're thinking of in terms of that?
Absolutely. And that kind of like tenderness. And I don't know if it's the same time as that scene, but there is this moment where Madame Blanc asks Susie, like, what part of the body is she for this company?
That's right.
Like, is she
that's the same scene, yeah.
Sex, like all this stuff. And Susie says, I want to be the hands of this company. That brings me to like a whole nother theme of the movie that
might be one of the most important scenes in the whole film.
Yeah, I think so too.
So talk more about what you think.
I think the idea of hands is so important to this movie, as well as like just to dance in general. Like hands kind of lead motion, right? They like they kind of are the very end points by which things either like start or finish in terms of our movements. And there's so many allusions to hands visually, like in the dream sequences that there are those odd dream sequences where it's like very surrealist kind of like videos spliced together. And there's a lot with hands. And I just think, and also, Helena Marcos, like her body is actually like covered in like baby hands.
Baby hands, that's right.
Yeah, it's like really, really grotesque. And so I really like that he kind of like really keeps coming back to that theme of the hands being. They're also like just
I should say. I appreciate the deepest connection between this film and your work. Is it okay? Is that too bold? Am I right? So
yeah.
No, I'm thinking about all your paintings. You must have really loved this film.
Yeah, absolutely.
In just one respect. This one, not there's other parts of the film, but this one respect.
Oh, absolutely. I think that's like, it's like where it hooks me the most. But beyond the dance is just the absolute reverence for hands. And hands are so important in my paintings, and in the body, and like especially lately in the since becoming a mother, there's even this other conceptual layer to the hands. Like they are what carries our babies. They are what nourishes them and touches them. So there's like so many layers of like why hands are so expressive and important, and why that was such a brilliant choice for Susie's character to be the hands.
The hands of this company.
Yeah. Yeah. And I just, back to like the dream sequences too. Yeah. I really enjoyed those because those were such odd image choices kind of lined up next to each other, but also really echo like the feminine, the body. Like there's like a pair of like bloody panties at one point, and it's not even like so obvious. It's like, it's not like this is period panties. No, it was more like there's like little bloody panties and there's a little worm next to the panties. Oh, yeah. It's so loaded, this imagery.
How did you feel about seeing that in the film? That's a different.
I like it because it's very off-putting, but very like clearly it's there to disturb, and it was part of these dreams.
The audience,
that the
initially I'm not sure they're dreams. I think
I don't know either. Maybe they're memories, but I remember in the film even Sarah says like when she first got there, she was dreaming of hairballs and toilets for weeks or something.
Yeah.
Because the witches send them all their dreams.
Oh, yeah.
And it's like another way of practicing control, kind of like the same thing with the seizures, I think, is like.
Yeah, it's a form of, it's a form of control that's in reaction against a control they don't like. That is the establishment, right? So it's interesting. You have a society. You want to call it, label that society patriarchy. That's the established order of Helmut Kohl in West Germany, and Angela Merkhoff 40 years later, 50 years later, Mark, just like whoever the powers that be, kind of.
Right.
And then they have their own society, which is against that. They're like, right there, I'm against that order. But they have their own order, right? And they're kind of sending dreams to their own members, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of amazing to send dreams or to communicate through dreams. Is that's a level of closeness that
yeah, and it's a level of manipulation and of like propaganda or something. It's like just a way to kind of like also bring these women together under some kind of similar visual experience that they're having in their dreams.
Yeah.
So there is that kind of like nature of cultiness and insularity, isolation.
Do you think that this movie's in dialogue with things going on in the contemporary? So maybe you are right. I hadn't thought of it. But you think about the Vow, NXIVM, the Vow, and Elizabeth Holmes, and different groups. The renegade Mormons who were the ones who are endangering their own children or indulging in very strange, what we would call things that actually aren't even part of traditional Mormonism necessarily, or maybe they are. Maybe this film is in dialogue with all those things going on. There's all these different renegade groups that are kind of cults, or they,
I don't know. I don't like thinking about it that way, because then, there's something in me that sees the coven as like still fairly positive force, like because they are representing the way that women can be powerful, is like amongst themselves basically, and they are so powerful. You know, that's like kind of the whole point of that climax scene, is like exploding heads and bodies and craziness. And just the power that they have, this like crazy power. I kind of saw that not as, you know, kind of like what you were saying about maybe witches have a problem with this movie. Maybe they do. But I still see it as like this demonstration of women coming together is powerful. I don't like to imagine it as more like The Vow or, you know, Nexium or any of that stuff, because that's just so fucked up. And
I mean, when I say that, well, that raises a question of how one evaluates groups in general.
Right. Yeah, I don't know, because my experience.
My apologies. I don't want to be misunderstood. I understand groups are necessary, but for me, all groups, whatever their intent or however virtuous, always for me initially, I'm going to be questioning them. Always skeptical. Every single group. So that they're going to include this, you know, anything, political parties. That's my bias. You know.
Yeah, so, I get that.
And again, I don't recommend that to anybody else, but I can't help it. It's just how my mind works. And
I think I'm pretty similar. I don't gravitate towards groups at all. And I find, I don't know, I find, you know, people can be so influential on one another, and we have to be careful of that.
Yeah.
You know? So, yeah, I think that's an interesting kind of experience, because that's what I was going to say, is I really don't have that many groups myself. Like, I don't come from a religion. I don't come from, you know, any, like, I'm not, I'd say like my main groups are like artists and maybe other mothers.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? It's like, I don't really.
Those are the main food groups.
Exactly.
The two main food groups. Yeah, that's gonna. But you don't identify cranberries or farms as part of your. Do you include that, or do you?
Yeah, but I think that's more like my family, because honestly, there's just not that many cranberry farmers out there, and you know, we didn't really like assimilate ourselves with other farmers. Like, we didn't know the like apple farmers or blueberry farmers in the area, you know. So, you know, it's such a specific crop that it's just like its own animal. But I do remember actually like having relationships with other cranberry grower families. So maybe that was like a thing, but not really presently in my life anymore, for sure.
Yeah. You still use it in your work, or use? I mean,
I do. I've been using it a little less, I think, just because I want to explore new aesthetic kind of ideas, but I think I'll always come back to it, especially as I continue. I'm still in the fertility journey. You know, we would like to have another kid, and
oh wow.
So, and it really still speaks to that, you know, this idea of the agricultural language of fertility, as well as the bodily language of that. So, yeah, I definitely still pay homage to it.
Oh yeah.
You know, at least like every few paintings has at least some kind of like allusion to cranberries, I think.
Well, at the end of this film, I was really blown away by that scene you're talking about, right? It was almost like a musical. Well, almost like it'd be or almost like you said almost like Technicolor, like that's
it was like
something made in the 50s or 60s. It's like the film totally changes, and and then you're just a remarkable scene.
Yeah, it is. And it's clearly trying to like demarcate itself. Like I was saying before about like how the red pops so much amongst his muted palette. Well, that scene is like, it pops so much.
But it's almost like this kind of it's not like a red, it's a little bit of.
Right.
pink in it, maybe. I don't know. If
yeah. Or maybe it's like, yeah, it's almost like this is pretty fluorescent pink, but it's like this meets red, you know?
Watermelon. Yeah.
And like the kind of the film work is like the camera work is like there's some slow-mo. I don't really know how I feel about it, but like it was definitely like a lot of different choices going on.
I know that I liked it when I was. I mean, well, I was very impressed by it, and I felt like something was happening. Happening to me in the film.
I think it made it more palatable, honestly, to see the kind of like the blood and also the frenetic movements of the dancers, like because those movements were so violent, like just the whipping of the body.
Oh yeah,
you know, this frantic movement. To have it slowed down like that was like made it like easier to swallow, I think, and also brought more attention to it in a way, like we were able to slow down and really digest it.
Right.
But yeah, that's still like the most mysterious scene to me, because that's the one that brings up this concept of Susie being Mother Superiorum and all this stuff.
So you haven't figured out the succession or if it's chosen?
No.
I mean, my best guess is that it's preordained, like a lot of.
Yeah, I mean, well, so that's the thing is, like, I was talking to my husband about it last night, and you know, he pointed out, remember the mother, like her Mennonite mother says, my daughter, my last one, meaning Susie, she was my greatest sin. So it's almost like the mother at least knew that she might be this force of the dark feminine or something, you know, something very anti-Mennonite, basically. And so, yeah, in that sense, it was preordained. But then in another, I just feel like she wasn't that aware of it until she came into this role, and she was given the light from Tilda Swinton's character and was put through these dances, you know? The other jarring thing I found visually, and in terms of the character, was Sarah's character after she like hurts herself, or after the witches hurt her, and she's basically hypnotized, and she goes back into dance.
Okay.
It's the scene of Volk.
Yeah.
I thought that was so intense, especially because that actress, Mia Goth.
Mia Goth is a great actress.
Oh my God, she's so
I mean, that's
good.
a whole other. We didn't talk enough, but Mia Goth and Chloe Grace.
Yeah, but Chloe doesn't really have that big of a role. I feel like she never dances. Well, so, but I found that Mia Goth's face that whole time was so crazy, because it was like she's so clearly like hypnotized or whatever, but she also she has that look of someone who has just been sobbing for hours and is suddenly like just gone stone cold face, but she still has that kind of look of like her eyes have been so fucked with and like so messed up, you know? And I just feel like that was such a successful kind of move, I think. Film. So haunting.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the things I remember, along with that scene of the ritual, that one ritual.
Yeah. Yeah,
think about, you know, you're doing a performance for somebody. Like they're doing a performance as a group. Now, when I go to see, I've been to see Paul Taylor, Esplanade, Mark Morris. When I was a little kid, I saw Aegon with Peter Martin and Suzanne Farrell, New York City Ballet. So I've experienced those things, and wow, and all of those things are professional works for an audience, and they have something like that in this film, right? They're presenting this show,
right?
So that we label that as secular, right? Or it's not a religious ritual; it's artwork, right?
Right.
Right. This is a different thing, right? Because isn't that interesting?
Yeah, and even Helena Marcos says when she's like being defensive of herself, she said it's not vanity, it's about art or something.
Oh, yeah.
And so we are reminded of that it's not just ritual, or it's not just something strategic, but there is like an art force here.
Absolutely. But there's also a religious force. It's a coven, and there's a
right.
And that's what for me is actually confusing about the film. For me, confusing, not that the film is confusing. The film isn't. The film, while mysterious, is not confusing. It's confusing about what the theme, the theme about the relationship between those two things. That's interesting, right? Because I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's more highlighting the duality than it is separating like art from ritual,
Right,
or art from spell casting.
Yeah.
I think it's highlighting kind of the history of using art in spell casting, and how, that's kind of like, if you think about it, that's where art came from. You think about ancient or Paleolithic fertility figures. That's something I really look to in my artwork. And those, were from tens of thousands of years ago. And they were probably these like idols of worship, that's why they were created. They weren't created just to be art, so there's there's a lot of questions about art.
Well, there's a school of thought that reverses that.
Oh, really?
I mean, it's the one I subscribe to, actually. So
more.
So that school of thought says that all religion was poetry and art first, and only became later a message or a how-to. It reverses that. So the early Christians, sitting around Jesus, or the fertility thing. So again, I don't want to be misunderstood. They had utility. They were practical, right?
Mm-hmm.
So again, I'm not saying they weren't practical, but people interpreted them from the very beginning as metaphorical. And only later did people become literal about them. That happens later in history. That's kind of the school of thought I'm most, and isn't that interesting? So
yeah, and maybe that explains why like Islam is so what is it called, like anti-icon, and it being the newer religion. So like, I think, that's an interesting way to look at it. But I'm just seeing the time. I do have to.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, thank you. You've been very generous. Have you gone too long?
No, this is fine. I am glad that I feel like we covered. I'm really glad we talked about the kind of mysterious elements, because those are the things I wanted to kind of dig around. And I'm really glad that you see the connection of this film with my work, because it's so connected from my point of view. And yeah, it was really interesting to hear your thoughts about the kind of era and the kind of period piece aspect of it, for sure.
Well, thank you, Alexandra Carter, and keep us informed of your newer shows and work. And let's do this again and pick The Brood. How do you feel about that? Is it a date?
Yeah, I don't know. Like, The Brood was just it took a long time to get to that point of being like, whoa. But it's an older film. Like, I have to give it that space, So yeah, I could maybe do that.
The Brood.
But yeah, I could do a lot of film. We could talk about a lot.
The Brood seems closer to some of the things we've been talking about, maybe.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
That's true. So thank you.
Thank you, Mitch. Always good to talk to you.
Thank you. Same here.
All right.